born in Ethiopia. I'm super pleased to be talking to Tamara Dawit today, the maker of Finding Sally, the film you just saw. Denanesh, Tamara.
Hi, thank you so much for making time to have this conversation with me today. I've been looking forward to it.
I've been looking forward too. Thank you so much. I think we're going to get right to it. Tell me, just from the beginning, if you can tell us about the decision to make your film, when, how, and why.
Yeah, I mean, so exactly like it's laid out in the film, I found out that I had this Aunt Sally that I knew nothing about, and that was about a decade ago. And I literally started an investigation within my family to find out who was she, what was she doing. And then I also started reading more about the period that she disappeared in Ethiopia. And it was when I was talking to my grandmother, and my grandmother realized that if I didn't know, that meant other young people in the family didn't know. And potentially other young Ethiopians and other Ethiopian families were not having the same conversations about the past. And my grandmother's really the one who pushed me and said, it's a shame that you didn't know about Sally and her story, and the stories of so many other young people who tried to fight for a better future have to be documented. We can't forget them, and we have to remember what they tried to do for this country. So it was really my grandmother giving me that push that you have to share this story, which is what sort of set me forth in the process of actually making the film.
And the others, if your grandmother saying, go ahead, and how did the others react when you approached them?
My grandmother was up until she died the head of the family. So when my grandmother said, we're going to do this, then everyone else had to sort of fall in line. Certainly many of my aunts are camera shy. I have another aunt who didn't even appear in the film at all. But those who took part, it was really because my grandmother gave this direction that this is a family project and we should work on it, and we have to remember Sally and remember what happened.
Oh, wow. That's intriguing with another auntie. So let's continue with the auntie. So you said you only found out about Sally or Selamawit as an adult, but how much did you know about Ethiopia growing up, both like the political, socio-political situation and other things? Because you grew up with your mother, right?
Yeah, and I grew up with my mother in Canada. My mother her background is Ukrainian and Scottish, so I certainly wasn't getting any information from her about Ethiopia, but it was always something that my father and my aunts were giving me information about. I mostly probably knew things as a child about the emperor, about my grandfather's career as a diplomat, and I've actually recently found like high school essays that I did on the launch of like tourism in Ethiopia and the emperor's reign and these sorts of things. But it was a very, I think, one-sided view of Ethiopian history because of my family's alignment with the imperial government or their proximity to the emperor. So it really wasn't until I was an adult and I came to Ethiopia and I started spending a lot of time there for work and for other film projects that I perhaps was able to go deeper or also widen the opinions and the sources of information that I was taking in.
Understand. So your, like you say, your family's history is like intimately linked to the history of Ethiopia, both in terms of like directly with the powers that were, but also as individuals. And can you talk about in general the impact of collective memory and trauma? I mean, we see how it plays out in your family, but have you heard? Do you know anything about other families, if other people? How other people?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big push for me to make this film, was to use my family sort of as the test case to say this is what happened to us, and this is the growth and the importance of our family reflecting on the past, reflecting on our memories and recording our memories. And it's really my mission to use this film to get other Ethiopian families and also Eritrean families who also suffered during this period and during the Red Terror to reflect backwards on what happened to them so that they can have that in mind when they're going forward. And I think certainly that's, the main piece of feedback I'm getting from Ethiopians who've watched the film, which to date is primarily in Canada and in Sweden and now also in South Africa, which is that people are having conversations. The elders are talking to their grandchildren, they're talking to their sons and daughters, and young people are asking their parents and their aunts and uncles what their experiences were there. And for many people, this is, the first time they're having these conversations.
Mm. And how do they feel about that? Do they, because in the film it's quite clear that even if it's hard, it's a cathartic thing. And do you have the impression that it serves the same, that it's the same reaction among those who watched it so far? Or that it's just traumatic, waking up all trauma and all wounds?
I mean, I think it depends on people's personal experiences. I mean, it's really hard, I think, with the Red Terror to look at the statistics, because the way that the statistics of how many people were killed or imprisoned or disappeared, everyone's counting different things and the numbers are sort of all over the place. But the thing that I always remember for myself in doing this work is that you would not be able to find any Ethiopian family who didn't lose someone, who didn't have someone tortured, who didn't know someone who was arrested. So everyone is touched by this, but I think the degree of trauma and how people carry that and how they deal with it is, of course, really different for every family, for every household. And there's certainly also people like some of Sally's comrades who I interviewed, who aren't in the film, but I used for my research process, who told me, I haven't told my own son or daughter who's, the same age as me. And now the fact that I'm seeing that you're interested in this and what you're gaining from understanding what your aunts were doing, I want to go and talk to my kids. But there's also other people that I interviewed who said, I'm not ready to talk about this yet. It's still too raw. So I think with everyone, it's different. And I think it's something that has to be done with sensitivity and with caution.
Yeah, clearly. So if we talk about your aunties, so you have at least 4 then that we were they 4 in the film or 3? Sorry, but
4 in the film, yeah.
Yes, 4 in the film, 4 amazing aunties, and it's no surprise that they feature prominently in the film, both because their connection, but also because the camera loves them. But in addition to them, most, if not all, interviewees are women. So tell me about that wonderful choice and statement somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that kind of happened without an intention. And then I realized that this is important because I wanted to first start by interviewing my family and trying to look at how do my aunts and my grandmother remember Sally and what are the differences between their versions of Sally, because they all see the Sally that they're comfortable with seeing. And then I went out to try and talk to Sally's comrades, some of Sally's old boyfriends, her friends from high school, and other people who knew her. Because I wanted to get sort of the other side of Sally, the people who were especially with her and close to her in the last years of her life. And in doing that, I realized that the strongest voices were actually the women. And in the same time, I was researching about the Red Terror and researching about the communist movement that Sally was a part of, and realizing that predominantly most of those stories are told through the perspectives and memories of men. We only have, one book that's a memoir published in Ethiopia, which is from a female perspective. And a lot of the rest of how we treat history, which I think is similar in many African countries and is similar in many other incidents in Ethiopian history, is just to look at the men, and the women end up being there because they were the secretary or they were someone's spouse or someone's girlfriend. And we often tend to forget to actually look at the important role that women played. So that's why I wanted to use this opportunity of having so many outspoken women to really look at the revolution only then from their perspectives.
And also then, something that also I was wondering about, that your father actually only appears as your auntie's brother. Do you want to say something about that choice?
My father passed away nearly a decade ago. My parents divorced when I was somewhere between 4 and 6 months old. So my relationship with my father was, for most of my life, we didn't have a relationship. He remarried when I was about 7, and then sort of exactly as it says in the film, just sort of faded out of my life because he was refocusing on the new family he was building. So, I mean, he wasn't in the film because he's deceased, so we couldn't interview him, but I also didn't have a relationship with him. And I think the fact that I didn't have a relationship with him is also, very closely tied to why I didn't know about Sally.
I understand. And tell me, while we talk about the other interviewees, how did you find the people in Ethiopia, her struggle comrades, especially the woman? Features a lot.
I mean, tracking down the other members of the EPRP, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, that took a lot of time and it took a lot of determination, but I wanted to hear that side of the story. And I felt, because of the version of Sally that some of my aunts were painting, I really wanted to hear from the people who were with her in Asimba, the people who were in the underground cells with her in Addis. And I spoke to probably about 10 or 12 individuals before I chose Fikerta, who's her comrade and her friend, who appears in the film. But I felt it was interesting and important to understand what happened to Sally after she left the city. How did she leave the city? What was she doing? Because my aunts really don't know. They have, what they've imagined or, second or third hand information. So I spent a lot of time trying to gain trust. And to find the right people. And it was really sort of like a snowballing. I'd find one person in London who would suggest someone who was in Malaysia, who then suggested someone in Holland, like that sort of web of being connected.
Wow, that's amazing. And even the woman, the 2 women in the village where she eventually passed on, how did you find them? That must have been.
That was actually much easier. I mean, that was maybe just luck. But because for whatever reason, when Sally passed away, she had a card on her that identified her as Catholic, even though she wasn't supposed to have any ID on her with her proper name. When you joined a communist movement, you're also usually not going to be religious. So we don't know why she had that ID on her. But because of that, she was the first member of the EPRP to be buried within the church cemetery because they knew she was Catholic. And because of that, that's why the church priests and administrators remember her. So it was actually through working with the Catholic Church in that part of Ethiopia that I was able to find elders in the community who knew where her grave was, and to find elders in the community who remembered where the house was that she had been living in.
Wow. That's extraordinary. It really is. So, tell me more. Let's talk about the music, the wonderful score. Another composer is a South African-Canadian singer, right? Zaki Ibrahim. Can you tell us about that successful collaboration, how it happened, and what your instructions were and how you worked together?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to do something different and more perhaps elaborate with the music and the score of this film. And I think really all the films I work on, and that's because I come from working in the music industry before I transitioned into film. And Zaki Ibrahim is as you said, South African Canadian musician. I've known her for probably 10 or 15 years. We've worked together in the past. And when I was in the research and writing stage of this film, she sent me a text and she said, I'm having a concert for this charity event and I'm going to be demoing some new music. And I went out that night being very much in the headspace of researching and writing the first treatment for Finding Sally. And the songs that Zaki was singing that night sounded like these were the words that Sally would have been speaking. And this is her 2 previous albums ago. And there was very much a theme of African women leadership and revolution on that album. So that's sort of what planted the seed. And then we just kept talking about it. Zaki spent a lot of time in Ethiopia, going to some of the places that Sally was in, reading and researching about the period. And then we actually recorded the score and the music in Ethiopia with another Ethiopian musician, Abagaz Shiota, and Ethiopian live instruments. So it was really for me like a wonderful and special process. And using Zaki, who was, she's a musician, she's a songwriter. This was her first time doing score for a film. But when you work with a singer, it gives you, I think, more possibility. And I wanted to use Zaki's voice to be Sally's voice in the film. Because in constructing the film, of course, we had many photos of Sally, but we don't have any video. We don't have anything where we can actually hear her voice. So that's something we tried to do by using Zaki's voice as an instrument throughout the score.
Okay, I understand. So then you can also tell me about the dramatized part of the film when we see Sally in the village. Tell me about those scenes. How you created them, the aesthetics behind it.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of a structural issue we always knew we were going to face, because I have hundreds and hundreds of photos of Sally and of my aunts, especially from their childhood and when they were diplomats, because there were always all of these sort of official photos being taken. But then once Sally went underground, there's no photos of her. So how do you tell the story about a main character who sort of visually disappears halfway through the film? And how do you also include, the visuals and the footage of northern Ethiopia in the Simba, which is where she went to when she went underground? So that's why we decided to use what I guess can be considered as recreations, but really the intention was to present like visual memories or dreams of, what Sally's life was at that moment, when she was, walking through the mountains, when she was riding a bus to the north, when she was in the house that she was staying at and dispensing medical supplies from. So that's how we tried to sort of stage those in a sort of dreamy frame. They were all shot actually through a mirror to sort of distort the images a little bit more. That was why we did that. I mean, we didn't have anything to put there in terms of archive, but we wanted to continue to make sure that there was still an image of Sally in that latter portion of the film.
It was very evocative. It was beautiful. So I mean, I know what I'm walking away with. The reminder that behind every big social political event or like event that we read about in the papers or hear about in history, that behind those are thousands, millions of human beings, and for them the story continues long after the rest of us start remember it, and the way after cameras have left and reporting have finished. And that is beautifully, I mean, reminded about that beautifully in this film. Is there anything else you want us to leave the film with? Want us to tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the film sort of has two separate messages depending on the audience. For the Ethiopian audience, it's very much just a message about remembering the past and understanding what happened and learning from it, because I feel that in Ethiopia we seem to keep making the same mistakes. And one of the things that I learned in researching for this film was a lot of young people, people who are, even my age, I'm 40 now, people who are younger than me, who were born after the revolution, don't know anything about it. It's not something that's really featuring in their curriculum. Even my husband learned a lot about his own country while watching me work on this film. So that to me is also a driving force, that this film in Ethiopia can be used to help people understand the recent history. But then I think when you look at, international audiences, and especially in Canada, because the film, was financed completely in Canada, and there was very much an interest for me, because I'm as much Canadian as I am Ethiopian, to show a different history of Ethiopia to Canadian audiences, because really the only thing that you know about Ethiopia in many parts of the world is about the famine. And I wanted to show that there was, vibrant and modern Ethiopia before the famine, there is still a vibrant modern Ethiopia today, and that there's many other stories that we should be looking at and actually understanding, I think, through this film a bit more about why the famine actually happened, the one in the 1980s that we're so familiar with, because that was, a continuation of what was happening during the Red Terror.
Yeah. Right. So you today, if we talk about you a bit, you live in Addis, but you're stuck in Toronto at the moment. But can you talk about your experience of getting to know Ethiopia as an adult, to a country that is yours, but that you never lived in, and your experience of living there, getting familiar with it, and your thoughts about Ethiopia today?
Yeah, so I've been living in Addis now, I think, for about 5 years. I had been in the 5 years prior to that living sort of out of my suitcase. I was for a while in Toronto, sometimes in Ethiopia. I also lived for a while in South Sudan. And I was sort of always waiting for the opportunity to be able to live in Ethiopia full time. And working on this film really was the catalyst for me to be able to move back, because I realized in order to really do this story justice and to really try and get these stories out of my aunts, I needed to actually be living there and to build relationships with them as an adult, and not be flying in to do a project for a few weeks or coming in for a vacation, because of course those experiences are completely different from actually living in the country, having your own home, and dealing with all the things that come with that. And I think it was also helpful for me to have a better understanding of what's happening politically in Ethiopia on a day-to-day basis, and being there to experience that versus reading articles from Canada and following information on social media. And it was for me very interesting, because when we started shooting the film was in the middle of a state of emergency, when there were mass protests across the country. People were being arrested, people were being tortured, there were killings. And for me, that was a very sort of important warning and reminder about why I'm making this film, because it was starting to look like the same sorts of things were starting to happen again. And that was also for me a reminder of why my grandmother said, you have to document Sally's story, because young Ethiopians have to remember that they can use their voices and they can stand up for the things they want, and they should be brave the way Sally was. And I think if you look at Ethiopian history, after the Red Terror, there are very few moments where there were sort of a mass popular uprising until the last couple of years. And this is still going on today. And the end of the film hints at it a bit, and we're waiting in Ethiopia to have an election. I don't know when, but I think it's really important to watch films like this and reflect on the recent history, so that people can have some sort of reflection and critical thought process about how do we want to move forward, and how can we be better as we move ahead.
That was quite was taken aback by your aunties talking at the end and being very optimistic, like the promise of the new prime minister. And I don't know when the last scene was shot, but I mean a lot has happened since even.
Yeah, I mean that last scene was shot almost a year and a half ago. And sat my aunts down in a room and asked them the same question today, for most of them, you'd have a completely different answer, which is, of course, correct. I mean, when Abiy came to power, people were very excited. I went and filmed an event that he had in Washington, D.C., which we didn't end up using in the film, but it was like being at a cult rally. And now he's been in office longer, and he's not doing all the things everyone expects him to do, but he's also only one person, so he can't manage everything. But now we're starting to see people are questioning him, and people are all asking for the individual things that they want, which is what should be happening in a democracy.
Or as I was going to say, that's healthy. Yeah. Let's take some questions here. Cry Kekana says, such an incredibly revealing film about Ethiopia. Was making the film cathartic? Do you feel like you're the custodian of Sally's story? Let's start there. Was it cathartic?
I think it was more maybe for my aunts, like it was for them a healing journey, because I had the benefit of being a bit removed and sort of the person that was cultivating this experience for them and cultivating their reflection. But of course, I mean, it's stressful. It was more stressful for me to have them watch the film and to figure out what they were going to say about it. And also to be in the film, because that was never my initial intention. I'm a very sort of introverted person. I don't like to be filmed. But that was really, in the end of the day, the best way to finance the film. And I think it also helped make the story more relatable.
And do you feel like you're the custodian of Sally's story? What do you say about that?
I mean, I guess. I think that I've never really thought about that. But I think I'm trying to keep the memory of Sally and of her husband alive, especially among a younger generation. But I think I really just want to be the custodian of encouraging more Ethiopians to document their past.
Next one is, do you feel young people in modern Ethiopia are as politically conscious as Sally was at her age?
I think that people in Ethiopia right now, many young people are advocating for their rights. They're speaking up. They're feeling empowered to talk about the injustices that they feel that they're facing or that they are facing. I think the thing that I've noticed that is perhaps a bit different from Sally's era, one, the things they're asking for are very different. But then two, also, for me, in studying the EPRP and the other communist groups that were operating in the 1970s in Ethiopia, they had a policy, they had an agenda, they had that sort of political structure. And right now what I see in Ethiopia is a lot of people agitating, unfortunately, often aligned to their specific ethnic group. But what I feel that we're lacking right now is the actual political infrastructure around those parties, and what is your actual ideology, and what are your policies, and what are you hoping to achieve, and what is the strategy behind that. And I hope that that's the thing that some work can be done around, so that when the election does happen, there are actual parties with a plan and an ideology that people can decide to support or not support.
I understand. Here another question. How long did it take you to make the film? You did say, but yeah, say it again.
Yeah, it's been about 10 years, so a long process.
Yeah. Well, those were the questions there. So let me continue for now, because I was thinking we can also talk about. You talked about, and you said a lot of things that lessons that haven't really been learned, like what you most regret, like what you wish that people would have remembered, like especially those who are politically active today, like what mistakes in particular would you wish for them not to repeat, that you see that they actually are?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's many other countries that you can look at that have had periods of mass killings, human rights injustices, where there's been more perhaps openness within society or within the school curriculum, in terms of the judicial process that happened. There were some trials after the Red Terror that occurred in the early 90s, but not everyone was tried. And some of the things were done sort of in a secretive way. So I think when those things are brought forward and done in a more public format, and there's opportunity for debate, there's opportunity for divergence of opinion and dialogue, then it's much easier to have an appreciation for the past and look at it in a bit more of a critical way, versus just taking the information you're spoon-fed. And which for a lot of people is they just don't have a lot of information about what happened in that period. For example, very recently there was a museum opened in downtown Addis, which is the Red Terre Martyrs Memorial Museum, who actually were a great supporter for me in researching and making this film. But if you look at the audience of who is going into that museum, it's primarily tourists. It's also primarily the Ethiopians who have a connection to that period and feel comfortable enough to go in there, because it's often a very triggering experience. But it's not a museum space that's used to bring in young people. There's no school tour groups going there and, learning about it. And in fact, there's a library in that museum space, and you can find a lot of young people there studying. And I've gone in and asked them if they ever go down and tour the museum space, and they said, no, we come here to do our homework because it's quiet, there's some books, there's power, but there's a complete disconnect between why would they go downstairs and reflect on the history of their own country.
Oh, so is it pure disinterest, or what do you think is?
It's perhaps disinterest, but it's also just not something that's maybe promoted as important or promoted as being of value. I mean, when I started this project and I went to Ethiopia and I had money to do a residency and to stay there for 6 months and do research, one of the first places I started to contact was the universities, because I thought perhaps there is a master's or PhD student in the history department who's studying this period that I can work with, that I can have, my research. And when I talked to the dean, he said, no, we're the history department. We study ancient history. Studying like the Aksumite Empire and Lalibela and things that happened, hundreds and thousands of years ago. And the history department, it's not within their mandate to look at anything in recent history. So to me, that was sort of a clear indication of what we value and what we focus on when we look back.
I understand. Let's see. Actually, I named the wrong person with the questions above. They were from Sharon Jackson, and she's also asking if the film is being seen widely in Ethiopia.
So the film hasn't been screened in Ethiopia yet, and that's probably the thing I'm the most frustrated about, but that's because of Corona. We were planning to do a screening, like a gala screening in a theater. Zaki was also going to come and, do a live performance of some of the score. And then we'd be able to have a discussion. And then we were going to work with the Red Terre Museum in their theater space to do more screenings before we do the television broadcast in Ethiopia. But because we can't have people gathering, we haven't been able to do that. And because internet is so slow and so expensive in Ethiopia, it wouldn't be feasible to do an online screening, because we wouldn't really be reaching anyone, or really anyone beyond the expat international community. So we're waiting. It may actually end up that the TV broadcast happens in Ethiopia before the theatrical release. But I mean, for me, a huge important part of this film is actually the in-person screenings, whether they happen in a year or in 2 years, for the community to come together and watch the film and have a conversation. And I actually want to use those moments to also capture the memories of other Ethiopians from that period, so that it's not just the memory of Sally and the people in the film, but that we can have a larger archive to house in the museum in Addis of more memories from that period.
But you said you've been in contact with broadcasters. Ethiopian broadcasters.
No, we do have a broadcaster in Ethiopia.
Okay.
So that will be happening.
That's fantastic. When? Do you know?
We don't know yet, because of course the film is also primarily in English. So it's actually right now dubbed into Amharic. And then as well, I'm hoping to dub it into some of the other larger language groups, because I want the film to be accessible for many audiences in Ethiopia.
Mandisa is asking, has the film inspired any action by other families of the victims or relevant bodies to find out about the missing, those who are still missing?
I mean, I don't know. Sort of as I mentioned earlier, I've certainly gotten a lot of messages on social media from from young Ethiopians in Canada who said they watched the film with their parents, or after they watched it, they went and asked a relative. So I know that it's sparking those sorts of conversations within households. I don't know if it's sparking further investigation beyond that, but I'm sure that could happen, and I hope that it does.
Yeah, and if it's being screened on TV, I'm sure that's going to happen too. Great. Tell me, you as a filmmaker, what's the future and the current like? I know that you have a project that is part of the Durban Film Art Finance Forum that is coming up very soon. But you also, I understand you're a producer for other people. So tell me a little bit about what's happening now and in the future.
I mean, I think I'm primarily a producer. The reason that I was directing this film was because it was about my family, and I realized that the best way to reflect on the Red Tear and to reflect on that moment would be through my family story. So it wouldn't have made sense for someone else to be directing that film. But I am primarily a producer. And right now I'm really focused on producing Ethiopian filmmakers. So that's why I have a project in the Durban Film Market, which is actually a dramatic film that's set in the same period. And it's with a filmmaker who I connected with while doing the research for this film, because he'd also in the past done a film about the Red Tear. And he's sort of the other main filmmaker who's really investigating and dissecting that period of Ethiopian history. So we're really aligned on having an interest in that, and I'm excited to be working with him.
That's fantastic. Cool. Another question from Semret Mbaye. When is the movie going to be available in the United States?
I don't know, but I know that there are some broadcaster sales being negotiated. So I think the best thing to do if people want to watch the film in the States or tell someone else about it is just to sign up for the newsletter, which is on our website, findingsally.com, so that once it is available in other markets, we will send you that information.
Perfect. Good. And being a producer in Ethiopia, tell me about what are your thoughts about the filmmaking landscape, climate, zeitgeist?
Yeah, I mean, I think now in Ethiopia, because I've spent a lot of time since moving back doing capacity building work, training work, and also doing sort of research and policy advisement, both with the Ethiopian government and also for the international community that has an interest in helping to strengthen and grow the domestic film industry. We actually have a really vibrant local film industry. We have, I think, around 80 or 90 cinema screens in Addis, which is much more, I know, than some other countries in Africa. We don't have that many screens outside of the capital, but we put out per year usually around 100 and 150 films, which are for this sort of local market, because Ethiopians really, really want to see themselves on screen. They want to see content in their own language, and they want to see, stories about their communities. So filmmaking and film audiences are really, really strong. But I think where the disconnect is in the amount of films that actually exit the country. And that's really why I started to work producing, because we have talented writer-directors, we have great stories, but there's often a need for someone to sort of be the go-between to help the film get out of the country and be seen in festivals and television channels internationally.
5 minutes to go, they're telling me. Is there something you want to say? Something else?
I mean, I think you've asked many good questions. I think the thing I would say, especially if there's Ethiopians who are watching in South Africa, that certainly if they have other questions or if they want to do their own research and they want tips about that, they can certainly message me on social media. All of our social media is Finding Sally. And I think, I'm open to help people investigate their own family history.
Fantastic. Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you for a beautiful film. Congratulations. And may it travel and may it be seen by many, many, in many places. Thank you so much.
Hi. We've just gone on Facebook.
Cool.
Wow, thank you both so much. That was a really beautiful conversation.
Great. It seemed like it went so fast. But it's
It
wonderful.
did.
And I'm getting really, really hot because I have this huge light on me. It was wonderful.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, and have a good night.